M23 rebels in the Democratic Republic of Congo early this year advanced and seized the town of Masisi. Same period, the Congolese government sent 172 death row prisoners to executioners, with 102 already confirmed executed, while the government kept mum on the third batch of 70 prisoners, including the May 19, 2024 37 coup plotters who were convicted and sentenced to death in September 2024, just as the country Minister of Justice, Constant Mutamba, threatened journalists with death penalty if they relate the activities of armed group he described as Rwanda Army and its M23 auxiliaries. On Sunday, Al Jazeera reported that the M23 rebels and the Congolese army are still in heavy gun battle in Masisi since the rebel group took control of the town more than a week ago. Al Jazeera report on Sunday contradicted the statement issued 3 days ago by the Congolese Minister of Justice, Constant Mutamba, that the Congolese army and the pro-government rebels have recaptured the town of Masisi from the M23 rebels. On his ex social media handle 3 days ago, the Congo Justice Minister, Constant Mutamba, tweeted in a French language as translated by Google to state that, "Bravo to our Armed Forces of Democratic Republic of Congo, FARDC, and rebel group fighting together with Congo military against M23, Wazalendo, for the recapture of Masisi. The enemy is in disarray. Any political actor, civil society, journalist, religious, who relates the activities of the Rwandan army and its M23 auxiliaries, will now suffer the full force of the law, death penalty. Our territorial integrity is not up for sale." It would be recalled that 37 alleged coup plotters, including 3 Americans, were convicted and sentenced to death in September 2024 by a Kinshasa military court in a trial against the failed coup of May 19, 2024 in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC. 51 people were tried by the military court in Kinshasa, the capital of DRC, with the hearings broadcast on national television. The 3 Americans sentenced to death were convicted for the offenses of criminal association, attack and terrorism, including Marcel Malanga, son of Christian Malanga, the alleged leader of the attempted coup. DRC Army stated that an attempted coup, led by little-known opponent Christian Malanga, was nipped in the bud early May 19, 2024. 6 people, including Christian Malanga himself, were killed. The putschers attacked the residence of Vital Kamerhe, then Deputy Prime Minister, before intruding the Palais de la Nation, where the offices of DRC President Felix Tshisekedi are located. Videos posted online showed the attackers, dressed in military uniforms and displaying the Zaire flag, claimed in the video that they wanted to change things in the management of the republic. Zaire, officially the Republic of Zaire, was the name of the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, from 1971 to 1997. Christian Malanga formed the United Congolese Party in 2010 and advocated for the return of Zaire. In 2017, he created a government in exile in Brussels, Belgium, giving birth to the so-called New Zaire. Marcel Malanga, who was born in Utah, United States, and 2 other Americans, stood trial and they were sentenced to death. M23 rebels, armed group, the government of Democratic Republic of Congo claimed is allegedly supported by Rwanda, have taken control of Masisi, a key town in eastern Congo, exacerbating the region's ongoing humanitarian crisis. The town is estimated to be home to around 40,000 people, and it is agricultural and mineral-rich area located in North Kivu province. Local observers said that the capture follows the breakdown of Angola-mediated peace talks between Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi and Rwandan President Paul Kagame in December 2024. While the M23 rebels fighting has built more tension, the Congolese government says it has executed 102 men in the past week, with plans to execute 70 more. Constant Mutamba, the country's Minister of Justice, stated in a statement that 45 were killed in late December 2024 with 57 executed in early January 2025. He said the men, aged 18 to 35, were armed robbers and urban bandits, known locally as auxiliaries. Mutamba added that the executions took place at Njenga prison in northwest Congo. A video posted online showed a flight of 71 people arrived at Njenga, but the government is yet to comment on the status of the prisoners. Mutamba, who is overseeing the executions, said the third batch will be executed, so the first two have already undergone the measure of execution by the death penalty. While some have welcomed the government's decision to execute the prisoners as a means of restoring order and security in the cities, others are concerned about the risks of abuse and human rights violations. It may be remembered that Congo abolished the death penalty in 1981, but it was reinstated in 2006. The last execution took place in 2003. In March 2024, the Congolese government announced the resumption of capital executions. The reinstated death penalty was intended for military personnel accused of treason, according to close watchers. Amnesty International, while condemning the execution of the prisoners, issued a press statement and stated that President Tshisekedi must halt plans to carry out mass executions. Responding to reports that more than 170 people under sentence of death have been transferred to Njenga prison for execution in the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, Amnesty International's Deputy Regional Director for East and Southern Africa, Sarah Jackson, said, "The announcement of these prison transfers is absolutely appalling. We fear imminent mass executions by the authorities amid a lack of reliable information about the status of people sentenced to death. President Felix Tshisekedi must immediately, publicly and unambiguously halt any plans to execute people in Njenga prison or elsewhere. Parliament should adopt a moratorium on executions, pending full abolition of the death penalty. We fear imminent mass executions by the authorities amid a lack of reliable information about the status of people sentenced to death. Authorities must also stop mass transfers to remote prisons, including Njenga, where dozens of detainees have previously died of starvation and disease. Any person transferred from the local area must be moved to a facility that can be easily reached by lawyers, relatives and human rights organizations, and all should be informed of their whereabouts." Amnesty International added that, on the 5th of January 2025, DRC's Justice Minister, Constant Mutamba, announced that more than 170 people, allegedly linked to criminal gangs commonly known as Kulana or bandits, had been transferred from the capital Kinshasa to Njenga prison in northwest DRC for execution. He said those transferred to Njenga were between 18 and 35 years old and had been involved in urban violence. Authorities have claimed resuming executions would help combat urban gangs, a claim unsupported by any evidence. President Felix Tshisekedi must immediately, publicly and unambiguously halt any plans to execute people in Njenga prison or elsewhere. Mutamba has previously threatened people suspected of links to criminal gangs with arrest, conviction and the death penalty, even before trial. In March 2024, DRC's government announced it would resume executions following a two-decade hiatus. Since then, death sentences by military courts have soared. These sentences often follow unfair trials, including against alleged members of criminal gangs and armed groups. Amnesty International opposes the death penalty in all cases. Justice Minister Constant Mutamba also during the week tweeted and stated in on X social media handle that, "I have not given an interview to any media, much less to the app on the operations to combat urban banditry, Zero Kuluna Idobo, that the Ministry of the Interior and the Ministry of Justice are conducting across the country." The AP dispatch revealed false information. I invite them to correct it in accordance with the law on freedom of the press. Congolese laws provide for the death penalty and the mechanisms for its execution. The Kuluna urban bandits tried and sentenced to death by our courts were transferred to high-security prisons, far from their place of arrest, to serve their sentence in accordance with Congolese laws. This phenomenon of urban gangs led to the overthrow of the Haitian regime, probably due to the absence of consistent measures of repression and dissuasion. We will show findings against the Kuluna who will be arrested and brought before the courts, because they sow death and desolation in society. VOA quoting AP also reported that the Democratic Republic of Congo on Thursday banned Al Jazeera satellite news network over its interview with the leader of a violent rebel group that has seized territory in the country's east in recent days. Separately, DRC's Justice Minister threatened journalists and others who report on the M23 rebels with the death penalty, though there is no law officially banning media from covering rebel groups. There was no immediate comment from Al Jazeera, a pan-Arab satellite television news network based in Doha, Qatar. According to DRC government spokesperson, Patrick Muyaya, authorities revoked press credentials of Qatar's broadcaster in DRC, saying the network had interviewed the head of a terror organization without proper accreditation. Al Jazeera on Wednesday aired an interview with Bertrand Bisimwa, the head of the M23 rebel movement in the eastern DRC. In the interview, Bisimwa blamed the government in the capital, Kinshasa, for violating an August ceasefire and claimed that M23 is waging an existential war. M23 is the most prominent of more than 100 armed groups active in the mineral-rich area near the DRC border with Rwanda, where more than 1 million people were displaced by fighting last year. A decade ago, the group seized the border city of Goma, and in late 2021 captured broad swaths of territory in eastern DRC. Al Jazeera's interview with Bisimwa was tantamount to an apology for terrorism and totally unacceptable, Muyaya told a news conference, urging journalists not to give the floor to terrorists. Hours earlier, DRC's Justice Minister Constant Mutamba said on the social media platform X that anyone who reports on the activities of the Rwandan army and its M23 auxiliaries will now suffer the full force of the law, death penalty. The Great Lake Eye media also analyzed the significance of the M23 control of Masisi and its consequences to the Congolese army as reported verbatim below. The first weekend of 2025 saw M23 seize 2 more towns in North Kivu province. Masisi Center and Losheberi were taken by the rebels after heavy clashes with the Congolese army coalition. Analysts say that one of the towns means a lot in the escalating armed conflict. Populated with about 40,000 residents, Masisi Center is the capital of Masisi territory. It is about 80 kilometers north of Goma, the capital of North Kivu. Given its geographical location, Masisi Center has been a supply area for the Congolese army coalition. Their logistics, foodstuffs, and ammunition were sent there before they were distributed to different bases. By capturing Masisi Center, M23 rebels have cut off supplies to the vast Congolese army coalitional forces. They are likely to withdraw as they can't stay in their positions while supplies cannot reach them, said a security analyst and journalist based in Goma. Security analysts predict that the rebels are likely to move forward to Walikale, an area that has been stronghold of the FDLR genocidal militia which Kinshasa treats as a reliable fighting force against M23. Despite support from the Burundian army, SADC troops, Eastern European mercenaries, American private military companies, and FDLR, the Congolese United States of America, USA President-elect Donald Trump will be no doubt the first ex-convict to become president in the North America country after Justice John Merchant sentenced him to no jail term and no fine on conditional discharge after the judge had last year found him guilty of falsifying business records and convicted him for criminal felony. Details of the judgment and other events that occurred yesterday at the court while Justice Joan Machan was presenting the judgment is published in our audio and video versions of this news report. President-elect Donald Trump was sentenced to unconditional discharge for 34 charges of business fraud related to hush money payment to Stormy Daniels during the 2016 presidential campaign. President-elect Donald Trump was sentenced Friday morning in New York after the Supreme Court refused to block the sentencing, making him the first U.S. president to be convicted and sentenced for a crime to take office. Trump appeared virtually from Mar-a-Lago, according to local media, while others also reported that he appeared virtually for the sentencing at a courtroom in New York. Trump could have been sentenced of up to 4 years in prison but instead was delivered a sentence that does not include penalties like jail term or probation in what's called an unconditional discharge. An unconditional discharge, in legal terms, means that the person is convicted of the charges but is not punished further, such as with jail time, probation, or fines. Essentially, they are released without any conditions attached to their discharge. This can happen in cases where the court determines that the conviction itself serves as enough of a deterrent or punishment, according to local observers in the United States of America. Trump doesn't face any jail time, fines or probation, but his conviction still stands and he will enter office as a convicted felon, one of the observers added. The source news media reported that Judge Machan emphasized that while the office of the presidency grants considerable legal protections, those protections do not diminish the seriousness of the crime. One power they do not provide is the power to erase a jury verdict, Machan stated, acknowledging the citizenry's role in returning Trump to office despite the conviction. According to CNN, Trump, appearing virtually from Mar-a-Lago, maintained his innocence. "The fact is I'm totally innocent. I did nothing wrong," he said, calling the case a political witch hunt designed to damage his reputation. Trump also criticized Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, claiming the case was unwarranted and harmed New York's judicial system. New York states that unconditional discharge is when a defendant is convicted without punishment such as imprisonment, a fine, or probation supervision. While Trump expressed dissatisfaction with the outcome, his legal team views the sentencing as a step toward appealing the conviction. Despite his felony conviction, the unconditional discharge means Trump will face no further penalties directly tied to the case, allowing him to focus on his political agenda and upcoming cabinet confirmations, the source report ends in quote. President-elect Donald Trump on Friday was sentenced to unconditional discharge just 10 days before his inauguration. The case stemmed from accusations that he falsified business records to conceal a $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels, who claims to have had an affair with Trump in 2006, a claim he denies, calling the prosecution politically motivated. Trump during the sentencing discussed his 2024 election victory, claiming he won the popular vote by millions and millions of votes and secured all 7 swing states, adding, "They've been watching your trial, so they understood it," referring to the voters. He also argued that legal fees were recorded by accountants as legal expenses, not by him personally. Legal fees were put down as legal expenses by accountants. "They weren't put down by me," Trump said. "It's incredible, actually."
Would your client like to be heard?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. This has been a very terrible experience. I think it's been a tremendous setback for New York and the New York court system. This was a case that Alvin Bragg did not want to bring. He thought it was, from what I read and from what I hear, inappropriately handled before he got there. A gentleman from a law firm came in and acted as a district attorney, and that gentleman, from what I heard, was a criminal or almost criminal in what he did. It was very inappropriate. It was somebody involved with my political opponent. Part of the records that we're talking about, they're saying, I just noticed where he said I was falsifying business records. Well, the falsification of business records, as they say, it was calling a legal expense in the books where everybody could see them, a legal expense. In other words, that legal fees or legal expense were put down as legal expense by accountants. They weren't put down by me, they were put down by accountants. I didn't call them construction, concrete work, I didn't call them electrical work, I didn't call them anything. They called a legal fee or a legal expense, and for this, I got indicted. It's incredible, actually. Now, if you look, my attorney alluded to it, the top legal scholars and legal pundits in this country, the ones that are quoted all the time on television, that are making their views felt and highly respected people, have said, everyone, virtually everyone that I know of, I haven't seen any to the contrary, not one, and none of these people are not exactly friends of mine, to put it mildly, but they all said this is a case that should have never been brought. It's an injustice of justice. Very respected Jonathan Turley, Andy McCarthy, Judge David Rifkin, a wonderful man who just passed away, by the way, Greg Jarrett, Ellie Honig from CNN, of all places. CNN said that, Paul Ingratian, Alan Dershowitz, they all said this is not a case that should be brought. It's not, think about it, legal expenses are down as legal expenses, and I get indicted for business records. Everybody should be so accurate. It's been a political witch hunt. It was done to damage my reputation so that I'd lose the election, and obviously that didn't work. And the people of our country got to see this firsthand because they watched the case in your courtroom. They got to see this firsthand, and then they voted, and I won and got the number of votes by far of any Republican candidate in history, and won, as you know, all 7 swing states, won conclusively all 7 swing states, and won the popular vote by millions and millions of votes. And they've been watching your trial, so they understood it. I wasn't allowed to use the lawyer-client privilege or the reliance on counsel. I had a lawyer that made this deal, and he admitted that. And he was also a totally discredited person. We weren't allowed to use the information from the Southern District that totally discredited him. It wasn't allowed to be put in. And that was terrible, unbelievable. And this is a man who's got no standing. He's been disbarred on other matters, unrelated. And he was allowed to talk as though he were George Washington. But he's not George Washington. He shouldn't have been allowed. The Southern District did a book of approximately 28 pages where I've never seen anything like it. They excoriated him. You wouldn't let it be put into evidence. So he was able to testify as a witness, and I think it's a disgrace to the system. I was under a gag order. I'm the first president in history that was under a gag order where I couldn't talk about aspects of the case that are very important. I guess I'm still under, so probably I won't do it now. I assume I'm still under a gag order. But the fact is that I'm totally innocent. I did nothing wrong. They talked about business records, and the business records were extremely accurately counted. I had nothing to do with them. Any of that was done by an accountant or a bookkeeper who I think gave very credible testimony and was corroborated by everybody that was asked. And with all that's happening in our country today, with a city that's burning to the ground, one of our largest, most important cities burning to the ground, with wars that are uncontrollably going on, with all of the problems of inflation and attacks on countries and all of the horrible things that are going on, I got indicted over calling a legal expense a legal expense. It was called a legal expense. I just want to say I think it's an embarrassment to New York, and New York has a lot of problems, but this is a great embarrassment. I believe that this and other cases that were brought, as you know, the DOJ is very much involved in this case. It's because that's the political opponent they're talking about. the DOJ is very involved. You have a gentleman sitting right there from the DOJ who was from the DOJ's office. He was also involved with the New York State Attorney General's case. And he went from there to here. He went around and did what he had to do. He got them to move on me. But in the meantime, I won the election in a massive landslide. And the people of this country understand what's gone on. This has been a weaponization of government. They call it lawfare. Never happened to any extent like this, but never happened in our country before. And I'd just like to explain that I was treated very, very unfairly. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump, you appear before this court today to conclude this criminal proceeding by the imposition of sentence. Although I have taken the unusual step of informing you in advance of my inclinations, before imposing sentence, I believe it is important for you, as well as those observing these proceedings, to understand my reasoning for the sentence I am about to impose. The imposition of sentence is one of the most difficult and significant decisions that any criminal court judge is called upon to make. Our legislature sets the parameters for an authorized sentence, but it is a judge that must decide what constitutes a just conclusion to a verdict of guilty. The court is vested with broad discretion in determining what sources or evidence it may consider to arrive at an appropriate sentence. In doing so, the court must consider the facts of the case, along with any aggravating or mitigating circumstances. In my time on the bench, I've been called upon to grapple with this weighty responsibility for countless defendants who have been found guilty after trial for an assortment of offenses, ranging from nonviolent Class E felonies to the most heinous of crimes, including homicides, sex trafficking, and child sexual abuse. The task is always difficult and deserving of careful consideration, whether the sentence be an unconditional discharge or incarceration of 25 years to life. However, never before has this court been presented with such a unique and remarkable set of circumstances. Indeed, it can be viewed fairly that this has been a truly extraordinary case. There was unprecedented media attention, public interest, and heightened security involving various agencies. And yet, the trial was a bit of a paradox because once the courtroom doors were closed, the trial itself was no more special, unique, or extraordinary than the other 32 criminal trials that took place in this courthouse at the same exact time. Jury selection was conducted, the same rules of evidence were followed, opening statements were made, witnesses called and cross-examined, evidence presented, summations delivered. The same burden of proof was applied, and a jury made up of ordinary citizens delivered a verdict. And it was all conducted pursuant to the rules of procedure and guided by the law. Of course, part of what made it feel somewhat ordinary was the outstanding work, preparation, and professionalism of the clerks, court officers, court reporters, security personnel, and the entire staff of this building who did their jobs as they would with any other criminal trial. So while one can argue that the trial itself was in many respects somewhat ordinary, the same cannot be said about the circumstances surrounding this sentencing. And that is because of the office you once occupied and which you will soon occupy again. To be sure, it is the legal protections afforded to the office of the President of the United States that are extraordinary, not the occupant of the office. The legal protections, especially within the context of a criminal prosecution, afforded to the office of the President have been laid out by our founders, the Constitution, and most recently interpreted by the United States Supreme Court in the matter of Trump versus the United States, which was decided on July 1st, 2024. As with every other defendant in your position, it is my obligation to consider any and all aggravating and mitigating factors to inform my decision. Some of those aggravating factors have already been articulated in my Sandoval ruling at the start of this trial and by my recent written decisions on December 16th and January 3rd. Thus, they need not be repeated at this time. However, the considerable, indeed, extraordinary legal protections afforded by the Office of the Chief Executive is a factor that overrides all others. To be clear, the protections afforded the Office of the President are not a mitigating factor. They do not reduce the seriousness of the crime or justify its commission in any way. The protections are, however, a legal mandate which, pursuant to the rule of law, this court must respect and follow. However, despite the extraordinary breadth of those protections, one power they do not provide is the power to erase a jury verdict. It is clear from legal precedent, which until July 1st was scarce, that Donald Trump, the ordinary citizen, Donald Trump, the criminal defendant, would not be entitled to such considerable protections. I'm referring to protections that extend well beyond those afforded the average defendant who winds their way through the criminal justice system each day. No, ordinary citizens do not receive those legal protections. It is the Office of the President that bestows those far-reaching protections to the office holder. And it was the citizenry of this nation that recently decided that you should once again receive the benefits of those protections, which include, among other things, the Supremacy Clause and presidential immunity. It is through that lens and that reality that this court must determine a lawful sentence. After careful analysis, in obedience to governing mandates, and pursuant to the rule of law, this court has determined that the only lawful sentence that permits entry of a judgment of conviction without encroaching upon the highest office in the land is an unconditional discharge, which the New York State Legislature has determined is a lawful and permissible sentence for the crime of falsifying business records in the first degree. Therefore, at this time, I impose that sentence to cover all 34 counts. Sir, I wish you Godspeed as you assume your second term.
Chief Ernest Azubelu Obiejesi, the founder of Obi Jackson Foundation, on Friday led other dignitaries to hold mass funeral service of interdenominational church servants to pay last respect to between 20 and 22 unofficially stated numbers of people that died in a stampede during the foundation Christmas rice and other gift items sharing event on December 21, 2024 at Okija community in the Ihiala local government area of Anambra State. The mass funeral service, where some families were in attendance with the portrait photographs of their deceased loved ones, was held at St. Mary's Field, Okija, with local media reporting that the shops and markets, especially the major markets in the area, were under lock and key in honor of the dead victims. Eze Nduka Duke, National Publicity Secretary of Okija Progressive Union, had requested all attendees to put on black clothes in honor of the stampede victims in a mass burial announcement he titled, Okija Mourns. Anambra Broadcasting Service has reported that businesses across Okija in Ihiala local government area came to a standstill today as the community held an interdenominational funeral service to honor victims of Okija stampede. The incident, which occurred on Saturday the 21st of December 2024 during a distribution of Christmas palliative by Obi Jackson Foundation, claimed 22 lives and left many injured, plunging the town into mourning. The traditional ruler of Okija, Igwe Nnamdi Okezi, the founder of Obi Jackson Foundation, Chief Ernest Obiejesi, the chairman, Dozie Group of Company Chief Chukwudozia Nwankwo, pioneer Anglican Bishop of Ihiola Diocese, Right Reverend Ralph Okafor, retired, were among the attendees. Addressing the crowd, Chief Obiejesi expressed deep concern over the incident, assuring the community that comprehensive steps will be taken to prevent future occurrences. After the funeral service, families who were yet to bury their loved ones proceeded to lay their bodies to rest. Also, Punch newspaper reported that no fewer than 21 people, mostly women and children, reportedly lost their lives during the tragic incident that occurred on December 21, 2024, during the palliative distribution being donated by a notable member of the community, Chief Ernest Azudelu Obiejesi, through his foundation, Obi Jackson Foundation. The interdenominational burial service for the victims held at St. Mary's Field, Okija, on Friday, had families of the victims, survivors, community members, and other notable personalities of the community in attendance in the low-key event. The event was organized by Obi Jackson Foundation, alongside the Royal Palace of the Okija community. During the service, the Very Reverend Donald Chukudulu, who anchored his lesson from the book of Revelation 21, 1-8, asked the Almighty God to console everybody who lost their loved ones and prayed that such would not occur again in the community. Chukudolu said, "We ask God to wipe away every tear and console the families of the deceased. We pray such an accident will not occur in Okija again. Okija mourns, Anambra mourns, and Nigeria mourns. Nobody would hear such tragic news and not feel sober. Only the Lord can console those who lost their loved ones, and we pray the Lord will continue to comfort the families of the victims." During his sermon, the Bishop of Ihiola Diocese, Anglican Communion, Ralph Okafor, who read from the book of Psalms 23, urged the families of the victims to move and continue to look to God for consolation, saying, "Past is past, we must move on." While mourning the victims, the founder of the Obi Jackson Foundation, Chief Ernest Azudelu Obiejesi, thanked the traditional ruler of the community and other members of the community for their support and show of love. Azudelu Obiejesi said, "Today, we gather here with heavy hearts to honor the memory of those we lost in the tragedy that happened on December 21st in the community. As the founder of the Obi Jackson Foundation, sincerely expressed my deepest condolences to the families of the victims and the entire Okija community for the incident. The foundation remains steadfast in its resolve to human development. This incident has strengthened our resolve to ensure that such tragedy will not occur again. Let this tragedy bring us closer and make us stronger as a community and have a resolve to forge ahead. This kind of tragedy can deter you from engaging in service, but we as a foundation are going to continue to ensure that we do everything that God has empowered us to do to ensure that Okija never suffers this kind of calamity again. We are humbled and reminded of the importance of doing good. We are taking decisive actions, and our resolve to serve the Okija people will remain steadfast. Together, we will rebuild. Together, we will make Okija a safer place where you will always eat and remember your brothers and sisters. The Obi Jackson Foundation will continue to do good. As the founder of the foundation, we have done this for 15 years, and I assure you, we will continue to bring succor and love to Okija. May all those families that lost their loved ones continue to relate, and we will support them with all the things they deserve. In his speech, the traditional ruler of the community, Emeka Okezi, urged the foundation to continue in its philanthropic gestures, as these have impacted positively on the community and the lives of the people. Okezi urged Azudelu Obiejesi to continue in his community service and impact on lives, and not to be discouraged by the unfortunate incident. The chairman of Dozie Group of Companies, Chief Daniel Chukuduzia, consoled the victims and donated a sum of 10 million naira to them. Some of the victims, who spoke at the event, expressed sadness over what happened while calling on the Almighty God to grant the souls of the deceased eternal rest. Punch newspaper report ends.
Osazuwa Connedo, bringing you the news in a more digital way.